Hey guys, what's up? Sandu here. Sorry for missing for the last 2 weeks or so. I had few days off with my family and we went straight to the beach. I needed to recharge my internal batteries and you know what? It worked as a charm. But I'm back now in the office and so new content will be coming really soon. Today I'll be testing probably the biggest box, aluminum box that I have ever received so far. So this Goliath of aluminum block is actually a power amplifier for your passive speakers and it's called Kinki Studio EX-M7. I have already reviewed around here the THR1 headphone amplifier, but I was always curious about their EX or Extreme series of products and I just got the honors to do a world first video review for this particular unit, so here we go. EX-M7, which I'll be simply calling M7 from now on, is not your typical power amplifier. So what is so different compared to other power amplifiers, you might ask? Well, first of all, it's a direct DC coupled amplifier, meaning that not a single capacitor stays in the signal path. So all the cabs, and there are plenty of them in this one, are used only for power filtering or for power storing for an instant power delivery. You know why I'm loving my benchmark HP so much? One of the reasons is because it's a wide bandwidth headphone amplifier and preamplifier. So M7 that I'm testing today is actually the same kind of creature. M7 will work with a much wider frequency response, more exactly from 0 Hz to 2.5 MHz. That is way above our hearing abilities. It also has an impressive signal to noise ratio of 130 decibels, A-weighted, and some whopping 420 watts in 4 ohms or 250 in 8 ohms, and almost double those numbers for an instant power delivery. The incredible spec sheet doesn't stop here, as M7 uses one of the best MOSFETs in the business, and those are Hexicon ones. There are also few Mundorf cabs, 4 toroidal transformers, yes, 4 of them, from which 2 of them are really huge, delivering up to 72 volts and 18 amperes to the output stage. I'm not going too deep into specs because you can check those yourself, but I will add that it also works in class AB, meaning that it will consume a lot of power, will offer a lot of juicy watts back in the process, and will dissipate a lot of heat as well. And by the way, about the heat, see those gold painted perforated aluminum blocks? The holes on them will go completely through the amplifier and the air that passes through them will cool down that extremely powerful output stage. Now, I've seen multiple amplifiers with lateral heatsinks, with internal heatsinks, using the wall case as a massive heatsink, but drilling holes so that air could move freely in and out and heat would go up instantly. That is some clever thinking from the Kinki Studio team, so I'm really impressed. The cool approach doesn't stop here, as Kinki Studio designed their M7 as a modular and easy to service device. They actually prepared a complete guide for M7, and with it you can troubleshoot any issues you might have with this one. An amp board went bad? No problem, simply replace it with another one using only home tools. I never seen a modular and easy to service design like this in a high-end power amplifier, so again, it's quite impressive. On its front plate there is only a simple on-off button and a large screen in the middle. That screen will be engaged only for a few seconds when you power it on or off, otherwise only 3 low-intensity LEDs will show its working status. Green light working in normal conditions, yellow light standby mode is engaged, and red light means that it detected an error and it's powered itself off. In terms of inputs and outputs, you have your typical unbalanced RCA and balanced XLR inputs, 2 speaker outputs and some interesting switches which I'll mention in a second. Kinki decided to incorporate a filtering circuit inside this unit that will remove noise from your power lines. It's called DC filtering. By default, I recommend leaving it at off position, and only if you hear any disturbing hisses, just pop the switch up and you will enable the DC filtering. It's really that simple. If you want to level up your listening experience, M7 is also equipped with an earth-ground optimization circuit. They also added a link float switch that will enable or disable the power earth with the chassis. You can connect the earth and ground to the upstream equipment, or you can connect those terminals to the ground box and see for yourself if there is an improvement or not. There is also an amp and speaker protection circuit inside, and in an event of misoperation or malfunction of the speakers, the protection circuit will immediately shut down the amplifier to protect it and the speakers from any damage. Okay everyone, enough with the talk, and it's time to have a proper listen to this big boy. In terms of sound performance, with so many internal components as lots of capacitors, transformers, transistors, MOSFETs and so on, Kinki is actually recommending a 300-hour burn-in time to shine it brighter in a stereo setup, and sincerely I was already expecting such a high number. So 2 very painful weeks of burn-in followed, but in that period of time I was working on my DAC headphone review, and I would pass by the living room and I would sit simply for a few minutes and I would listen to whatever my Tidal playlist would play in that particular day. I think it was the 3rd day of burn-in when Tidal Hi-Fi started playing some recommended tracks, and Points of Authority by Linkin Park started playing, and how should I say it? The bass impact on the 20, on the 40-second mark, please check out for yourself, was something that to be felt, was something that I didn't experience so far with these particular speakers. And I don't mean that the bass was simply going lower, or maybe it was more detailed or more layered. I mean that the pure raw impact and kick in the bass that M7 created was simply unheard of until this moment. Do note that S400 loudspeakers have a huge passive radiator on the back. Yes, its passive means that according to its creator it eats watts for breakfast with fast energetic music, and this is precisely why S400 sounded super snappy only with juicy power amplifiers and decent or more than decent with integrated amplifiers. So even at day 3 I knew that in terms of sheer bass slam, bass impact, which is simply the most difficult thing to achieve in any amplifier, be it headphone amplifier, integrated or power amplifier, M7 was simply one of the best, if not the best, that I experienced thus far with the normal sized Buchard S400. As I have already mentioned in the dedicated review, Hegel H190 and then Keces S125 power amplifier were doing sweet love, awakening some sweet dynamics in the process with these speakers. But M7 felt like going all in and really deep with the Buchards. So it pounded so hard that I ran back into my office and I engaged my headphone setup, which I knew that is world class in terms of bass, so ODC LCD4 and Kenerton Magni driven by the benchmark HPA4. And to my surprise, the sheer kick and impact into the eardrums was considerably lower compared to the S400 driven by the M7 power amplifier. So even at that time I was ready to say that M7 is probably an overkill power amplifier for the S400, but that doesn't mean that Buchards didn't scale, because they really did, and what a pleasant surprise for a transient nut as myself. Now, before talking about the noise floor, you should know that the Matrix Audio Elementix is already a very serious stopping force for anything that has to do with digital jitter. Another thing to add that when I'm using its internal streamer, USB connection goes out of the discussion, so again the jitter that might come from a noisy PC is simply nowhere to be found. And lastly, the costly power lines that I have implemented at this place really cleaned up the mess that I had before that. Especially in my office, everything sounds crystal clear and engaging from morning till dawn. Even without the benchmark HPA4 in my chain, Matrix Audio Elementix plus M7 was simply an amazing match, and even at very high volumes I didn't spot a dirty background. So I went as far and approached the S400 loudspeakers at an angle so I could preserve my hearing, and I cranked that volume a little bit higher. I was 22 dB away from maximum volume, and still S400 sounded super clean without any trace of distortion or noises. Even with that DC filtering set to off position, sound was always crystal clear and dark as night. So I've experienced in the past multiple power amps that were raising that distortion at higher volumes, but with such a high performance power filtering inside this unit and to a lot of power to spare, M7 is simply free of any noise at any volume position. In terms of transient response, and as usual this is the most interesting aspect to talk about in all my reviews, if you remember my Flux Lab Acoustics FCN10 review, where I felt a very strong correlation between output power and the actual punch and slam an amplifier could actually provide, I had a sense of deja vu while listening to this one. It still has twice the power to compare to my daily driver, which is the Keces S125, and about 6 times the power of the Keces E40 integrated amplifier. So as you might expect, M7 simply outperformed the rest of the gang and provided simply a much better transient response. I'm refraining from using big words in here, but in all honesty, M7 is simply the definition of fast transient response, and once fully burnt in, simply expect a lightning quick speed and a really powerful punch into the chest. That will be felt for quite some time. When I decided listening to some electronic music with this one as Infected Mushroom more than just a name, I couldn't hold still my excitement level anymore, as positive energy simply spiked pretty high in my body. I looked back at the speakers, yep, it's still Bucard S400, but the scale of the music was simply unrecognizable, with notes jumping out towards me directly into my body. So it was an experience that I will not forget very, very soon. I simply couldn't hold still while listening to this music and having this kind of performance, as I believe M7 possesses one of the best, if not the best, pace, rhythm and timing that I have experienced thus far. As for resolution and transparency, compared to my all past integrated and power amplifiers that I have used and compared to my actual power amplifier, M7 simply has a much higher sine-to-noise ratio, meaning that when I'm listening to it, I'm sure that music is coming towards me in its purest form possible, without too many things staying in its way. Well, except for the room acoustics that always has something to say, to add or to remove from your listening experience. Going through a huge music collection covering a wider range of musical genres, I can safely say that M7 chooses to have this see-through transparency and quite high resolution. Even past top octave, so past 16 kHz area, it sounds very clean, very defined. So did I hear a few additional micro details compared to, say, Hegel H190 or Keces S125 E40, or to smaller power amps as Burson Bank or SMSL DA8S? Sure, I did a lot more details than that, and it was presented in a very natural, non-aggressive way. I especially liked the top end, so while being extremely textured and clean sounding, it was never bothersome in the long run with brightness or with dryness. So there is no point of me going through a few particular songs just to arrive at the same conclusion, that M7 is simply a clean and transparent sounding amplifier. In terms of soundstage and depth, I always felt that a really snappy sounding amplifier that pushes bigger amounts of air will always sound considerably bigger, airier and larger on all axes. So I mean, it shouldn't come as a surprise to anyone that a big power reserve and a very good diaphragm control should have a huge positive impact on the stage size. So I wish I could tone down a bit my enthusiasm level for this particular unit, but there is no other way in saying it that M7 is simply an open sounding amplifier. So it's not shy at all when it comes to scale and depth information. And no matter that is song that is being played, it's always spot on in terms of stage size. M7 is easily showing an increase or decrease of air mass in the recording studio. And if I'm switching to some live records, then I simply cannot spot those imaginary walls anymore, with notes flying simply to the abyss and fading away slowly and peacefully. So case in point, Hotel California by Eagles can still be considered as a reference recording in testing out the stage size, the note placement in the room and depth information. So with songs of this caliber, I simply forgot about doing anything. I just grabbed a glass of smoked whiskey and just relaxed myself. Such a goosebumping and relaxing experience. I think that M7 simply shined brighter with these particular recordings, and again it's shown a massive increase in transparency, stage size and depth, and I think that M7 was made for this kind of music. As for the frequency response, I started swapping few amplifiers back and forth so I could have a comparison later on, and this is where the biggest difference was felt immediately, that is simply called bass. And what a difference that was. I couldn't believe that S400 could awake such notes with its passive radiator on the back. I never heard them as alive and as hard-hitting, especially in the bass. It was something to behold. So I'm comfortable saying that in terms of bass, starting with the lowest octaves and finishing with the upper bass, M7 is simply having a perfect blend of impact, of control and sustain. So could you wish for more in amplifier? I don't think so, since bass is actually the hardest thing to move, to sustain and decay naturally. And this is where M7 is actually shining with its very robust and powerful output stage. If you love bass and everything that has to do with it, M7 got you covered. Midrange felt simply natural. It was a bit denser sounding compared to my former amplifiers, always full-bodied, and while simply walking in my listening room, I felt that the air was somehow heavier too. So M7 is actually at the opposite pole compared to the most Class D amplifiers, so without a single trace of dryness, or finesse, or brightness. I particularly enjoyed listening to acoustic music with this one, where I felt simply musical notes were more visceral, more real, and more soul-grabbing. It's quite difficult explaining with words the exact feelings that I had, but I would just say that I was carried away by music. Treble also felt having a natural texture. It carried a decent amount of sharpness and leading edge, and if I wanted just a little bit more sharpness, I could easily add a benchmark HP4 that would simply do that. But in this particular setup, I enjoyed my music without the HP4 in the audio chain. All in all, I felt a really good tonal balance, and M7 offered a perfect dose of naturalness, mid-range presence, bass authority, and lots of micro details in the treble. I wish more amplifiers would strike such a nice balance between being technical and natural sounding at the same time. I also did a comparison with my daily driver, which is the Keces S125 power amplifier, and I also left some words regarding the Hegel H190, but since I don't want to make this video super long or boring, please check out my written review that you can find below. It's on the chapter 7 that you can find all that comparison. It's one click away, so please check that out. Going on into the conclusion, there were a lot of green flags raised with this one, even from the start. The component selection was simply top-notch. It had impressive specs top to bottom, especially that output power, that wide bandwidth and that very high signal-to-noise ratio stood out from the rest. Not going to lie that I was very anxious to try this at home and make a proper evaluation for this unit. It simply deserved my full attention. It offered a fresh sound, it had a denser and a full-bodied presentation, a powerful kick into my chest, a very spread-out soundstage, an organic and lifelike performance that I didn't experience yet with my speakers. So coming at close to 2600 bucks, M7 is not cheap by any means, but considering its immaculate performance on all fronts, M7 is wholeheartedly recommended. Okay guys, I hope you enjoyed my review. My full in-depth review is waiting on my website. It contains a lot more info. In case you want to support the channel, please subscribe to it, and as usual, listen to my music. Be positive, and I'll see you next time. Cheers guys, bye bye.